Tone. What is it? Why wouldn't your English teacher shut up about it? Why didn't school teach you personal finance instead? The answers, in order, are it's the metafictional voice of a given text, it's arguably the most important aspect of storytelling and the most notoriously difficult to master, and finances are simple and universal, and your parents should be able to teach you themselves. Or Google, or YouTube, or TurboTax. Please sponsor me, TurboTax. But just talking about tone, while I find it fascinating and mysterious in principle, is boring in practice, even for me. So instead, I'm gonna talk about Chainsaw Man, because Chainsaw Man is hot in the streets, and I am desperate for your attention. Chainsaw Man. Okay, so quick literature review in mood versus tone. Mood is the atmosphere created by the aesthetic choices of a text. In film and television, things like camera work, production design, color palettes, art style if we're talking animation, these are the building blocks. Tone is described in literary terms as the author's feelings toward the subject matter or audience, which, in film and television, is expressed through writing, directing, and editing. The creative forces that interpret the story structure combine to add context to the plot. Examples: Attack on Titan and Dorohedoro are two contrasting anime made by MAPPA. Both are violent dystopian action series with built-in elements of horror, but that's basically all they share. Attack on Titan has a very bleak, almost melodramatic mood. It's a tragic epic about the cyclical nature of violence and the meaning of freedom, with what could be read as a cynical, ultimately very grim tone. Take note that those are relatively similar words. Dorohedoro, on the other hand, is a black comedy. Its mood is grisly, but also chaotic and borderline whimsical. Death means next to nothing, even within the text. Its tone, contrast to Attack on Titan, is blatantly irreverent and yet surprisingly earnest. It's a story with a more optimistic core, and the main vehicle through which it's channeled is the character's point of view. Now, Chainsaw Man. That is a tough nut to crack, which I love in a story. It is itself a violent dystopian action series with built-in elements of horror made by MAPPA, but it encompasses a much wider range of mood, swinging forcefully from bleak to wacky, from cozy to claustrophobic, which isn't something entirely unheard of. Not many stories occupy a very specific atmosphere for their entire duration, but it's the speed and intensity with which Chainsaw Man jerks around that makes it so hard to pin down. It's difficult to grasp the true nature of the story, the tone it's going for. You don't really know what the author sees as right or wrong, whether he wants you to make your own decisions or whether you're being subtly manipulated. It's carefully designed to be utterly fucking incomprehensible, to bask in its own weirdness, its very horny weirdness. I have not read Chainsaw Man, but the first season of the anime has a swaggering confidence in its dichotomy, and I don't see why it would bother stopping. It's a real puzzle, but that doesn't make it weak as a narrative. It is, in fact, engrossing, addictive even, because it creates tension not just within its plot, but within its tone. And it all starts with that absolute hobgoblin Denji. It's such a cutie, though. I do enjoy him. Clickbait title card, I know, but bear with me. Denji is, of course, not a literal sociopath. He is a naive, in fact, completely ignorant product of perpetual destitution. Denji has spent so much of his life as a completely uncared-for street urchin, dehumanized by everyone, especially his Yakuza bosses. He's more or less lost the ability to see other people as people. Denji as a character is, at bare bones, a subversion of the stock standard shonen protagonist. Specifically, ostensibly, he's Naruto. Blonde, dumb, charmingly petulant, thoroughly single-minded. He has a hyper-violent demon living in his chest, and he even quickly finds himself a sullen, dark-haired rival who openly wants to kill him. The twist is that in this story, it basically just took too long for someone to finally be nice to Naruto. The result, Denji, is a weaponizable schlup who lacks the emotional framework for ambition. When we meet him, he cannot make meaningful connections outside of the one he's already made with his dog, he cannot form long-term goals, and he cannot so much as question his greater purpose. In effect, he is driven exclusively by comfort. He's trapped in the hierarchy of needs at the basic level. Food, shelter, warmth. The most complex desire he can comprehend is sex, which ultimately is still just a form of physical pleasure as far as he's able to wrap his head around. Insert his role in public service, which he joins as an unwitting or at least indifferent walking bait hook made of actual chainsaws, solely because the pretty lady in charge said she'd take care of him and also bit his finger. Out of context, this is horrifying and dystopian. But through Denji's soulless eyes, this is just a black comedy. Once he accepts Pochita as his heart, he becomes physiologically closer to a devil than a human. He is entirely out of concrete reasons to give a shit about any conflict greater than who wants to kill him personally. In being literally disinterested in the existential threat devils pose to humanity, he becomes narratively unaware of the stakes. This creates a disconnect in the tone. While we as the audience can grasp the cruel irony of a world living in fear of devils who ultimately are only emboldened by it, a surprisingly powerful metaphor for collective paranoia in general and gun panic in specific, Denji's relative exclusion from the collective consciousness makes him physically immune to the mood of the text and keeps us from hyperfixating on it. It's really very clever. We aren't sure why, but don't really have the time to wonder why this story doesn't feel as dark as it probably should. Instead of feeling sympathy for the devils, we're being made to feel a little less sympathy for the humans. This is not to say Tatsuki Fujimoto thinks collective paranoia is strictly stupid, or that gun violence is not a problem. He is not Denji. We are not Denji. And in not having a self-insert protagonist, Chainsaw Man is already in the top 10% of anime all time. But there is a legitimate reason his point of view is so strongly expressed. What Denji's lack of self-actualization means for the story is, we as the audience are partially shielded from the grisly reality playing out around our protagonist. We can recognize when Denji questions if he'd ever cry for his fallen comrades that this is wildly unhealthy. But that doesn't change that the film language actively downplays the emotion of Chainsaw Man's numerous layers of tragedy at every turn. And that kind of makes Denji sound like a bad dude, but you like Denji. I like Denji. We all like Denji. Because despite everything, he's generally a nice person, which is why this tempering works. If you replace Denji and Power with two characters who are just as sullen, driven, emotional, or God forbid Machiavellian as the rest of the cast, the resulting tone is unrelentingly brutal, not unlike Attack on Titan. Their position as pseudo-devils and disposition as aggressive but ultimately fun and charming troublemakers are interlinked. They have to be insolent or this becomes a depressing and seemingly nihilistic vision of humanity's self-destructive tendencies. But they have to be likable, or else they really do start feeling like sociopaths, and then this just becomes edgy garbage, which is 10 times worse. What you get with them instead is more of a wry angst. They don't necessarily take things too seriously, but they're not completely detached from, or worse yet, actively disdainful of, the serious situations they're involved in. It brings the levity this story needs, gives us space to breathe, and keeps things grounded. Their dynamic is funny, and it separates them both from their full devil counterparts and their human supervisors, purposely contrasting them as primal and impulsive, but in a good way. The weirdness and cavalier energy they inject into the atmosphere is like a big fat monkey wrench in what is the otherwise oppressive narrative framework of a supernatural thriller. While they make the story more palatable and interesting, they also make it more messy. It's why their coworkers all hate them. Which leads us to the question we all know the answer to anyway. What makes public service think these two idiots are worth the trouble? Okay, This one is just stupid, but I swear I'm making a point. Specifically, this is point B, and it cannot exist without point A. We must remember that the central character, the strongest point of view, is Denji, and exactly 3 things matter to him. 3 meals a day, soft bed to sleep in, and getting his dick wet. Makima is offering him a bare minimum of 2 of those things, so we are forced to ignore the many, many red flags. Again, I have not read ahead, but if you're watching this show and you have eyes, you are aware that the story at least wants you to think something is up with the boss. This woman's aura screams, hey, dick nuts, I'm a liar and a snake, I'm straight up evil. She just oozes bad vibes, this lady, in a way nobody else in the cast really does. The near godlike power at Makima's disposal, coupled with the metaphorical implications of it requiring the outright sacrifice of other people, it's not a complicated introduction, right? She is here to make you, the viewer, understand there is a greater game of chess being played. She's openly manipulative of Denji, even lays it out the moment they meet that she intends exclusively to use him. But because he's Denji, he's fine with it, because she said she'd take care of him, and also because she's hot. In direct contrast to the non-human leads, who are characterized as animalistic but by that same virtue not complicated or malicious, almost every human character is shrewd, secretive, maybe even conniving. Public service in general, and Makima in specific, are unambiguously seeking a means to an end, and are willing to sacrifice anything and/or anyone to achieve it. What's hard to explain is the sheer narrative power of having your protagonist, and therefore ostensibly your story, just come out and say, I don't really mind. There's no metaphorical wall here. Public service is the government, and governments are well known for closing all the blinds and doing some messed up shit in the name of protecting the masses. That's why they want to recruit people who are unstable, fearless, and unquestioning, like Power and Denji. Is that all there is to it? Of course not. Each human member of public service comes with their own obsessive yet delusory vendetta against the gun devil, and equally obsessive yet visibly jaded coping patterns. Except Makima, who's just a cold and terrifying and potentially immortal monster lady. But remember, she's hot, okay? The purpose of the humans is to carry the burden of Chainsaw Man. They are suffering the story, whereas Power and, to a far greater extent, Denji are just sort of pinballing through it. It's not lost on us the inherent trauma of their life path, nor the inherent sin of their blind determination. But again, it's all quietly downplayed because Denji doesn't care. Purposely taking the air out of their existential problems is a bold, risky narrative strategy. But this story is not wasting that momentum shift. It's constantly juggling the intensity of the human conundrum and the chaotic joy of the demi-human farce. They're working in harmony to obfuscate the meaning of the text as a whole. Could it all go tits up? Absolutely. Could it all be a trick to sell more Makima body pillows before she does something unambiguously awful? Easily. But there's no denying the strength of this tension as it stands. Public service wants to kill the gun devil. They want to strike at the heart of collective fear. The deeper they get into that racket, the more they'll start to look the same as their target. That's the theme. We're meant to wonder as we go deeper into this, not only what could possibly be the right answer to this actively debated real-life question, but as you'd expect from a story like this, just what it means to be human. How quickly do we become monsters, and for what is it worth? Can we ever go back, or are we only the humanity we haven't yet lost? How hot does someone have to be for us to look past their toxic personality traits? I think the moment that we really see the tone of Chainsaw Man fall into place is all the way at the end of the season, when Denji and Aki come together to just wail on Katana Man's balls until they tire themselves out. It's goofy, but it's actually got a lot to it. Denji's willingness to kick Aki in the balls way back in the first couple episodes is a vital piece of his characterization. He thinks only in the immediate of comfort and pain. There's no such thing as honor, and there's no such thing as abstracts. This moment we've come to isn't just a cathartic, if ultimately ridiculous, act of petty revenge for Himeno's death. It's closure, in the Denji method. Denji just doesn't have the framework to conceptualize revenge past inflicting sheer pain. He doesn't understand the emotional impact losing Himeno had on Aki, and the complex relationship between payback and closure. The only thing he's ever cared about is permanently a part of him. It kind of scrambles an already sorely lacking grasp of the grieving process. Aki, however, does understand no amount of honor or restraint will bring Himeno back, and for the first time, he submits to Denji's perspective and takes what he can get. It is both poetic and profoundly stupid, which is Chainsaw Man in its most refined form. While Denji and Power are living in Dorohedoro, the rest of public service is living in Attack on Titan. And the way these perspectives actively clash and start to blend together is the beating demon heart thing of what makes Chainsaw Man so viscerally compelling. You never know how to feel. You're experiencing so much emotional whiplash, and on top of that, it's so fucking good that it becomes addictive. This is a story you're desperate to understand, with characters you're desperate to unravel. Your conflicted attachment is what drives your incessant thinking about every little thing you see, and yet keeps you from forgetting to enjoy the ride, which is why I'm not worried about the ending. I have not heard many people say this story sticks the landing, but I, for one, am on pins and needles waiting for the presumably multiple seasons of television that will lead us there. Chainsaw Man is an emotional roller coaster, as wildly fun as it is exhausting. It makes absolutely no sense, and even if in the end it still doesn't, at least for now, it's in a good way.